A dangerous period. Yeah, I would say that would, if someone put a gun to my head and said pick a year, I think it's different with everybody. I think for someone it could be 3, for someone it could be 10. Yeah, I think 5 to 10 years is for most everybody. That you have to have a deepening. I think the first period of time you're dealing with the consequences of your drinking. Even though it looks like you're solving problems, you're not solving problems. You're solving the consequences and the conditions that your illness created, but not the cause. Not the cause, not the conditions. And the second layer of stuff that's more subtle has to do with, can you have a long-term, can you have a marriage rather than a relationship? Can you have a career rather than a job? Can you live life in a way that you don't have to throw a hand grenade in the son of a bitch every 6 months to a year? Can you really start to put a maturity and a stability and love into my life and let it blossom? And to do that, we have to deal with the second layer of stuff that we didn't even identify. We weren't interested in that kind of stuff. Our pants were on fire. I mean, we were in water with 6-foot waves hanging onto an oar. I mean, we weren't listening. Someone said, "Well, you want to do a list of your defects of character?" So get me the hell out of this water. I mean, we're in a paradigm of survival, and that's the problem that most of us have. Most of us come in here with a paradigm of survival, and we do just enough to get by. I know guys that if it takes them $40,000 a year to live, and they accidentally make $20,000 in the first couple of months of the year, they'll slow their earnings down so that they get to 40 at the end of the year, because they know how to survive, they don't know how to excel. And that is, for many of us, we don't know how to take the lid off the box. We really don't know how to open up and take a look at what would happen if there weren't those limits. What would happen if I really did the deal in a more complete way? And I think many of us, I think Desmond Tutu, no, it was Mandela that said that, we're not afraid of our flaws. We're afraid of our wonderfulness. We're afraid to embrace the part of us that is without limit. We're used to our defects of character. We're not used to the idea that what would happen if we really took the lid off the box and went for it all the way. That's a really intimidating, almost more intimidating than dealing with our limitations. But our mind keeps thinking we should have when Chris is Chris, right? When he brought up the question, our mind thinks we should be healed or cured. Well, anybody who's on a spiritual walk, I mean, if you go get a spiritual advisor, if you go, which I've had a spiritual advisor through most of my sobriety, I mean, they'd laugh at that you wouldn't need any help, that you wouldn't have some ups and downs, that you wouldn't have dry periods, that you wouldn't have some very serious, difficult, negative times, that you might not be, we keep talking about Bill's Great Depressions. Well, crap, amongst men, I mean, I don't know what the figures are with women, but depression is one of the greatest problems with males in sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. And we talk about, isn't that weird that Bill had that problem? I don't think it's weird that Bill had that problem. I think it goes with some of the chemistry and biology of being a drunk. And it's not fun being depressed. Yeah.
I think I've got a question, but I'll just share, because what you're talking about, like Anthony Alcoholic, like everything. What it's like you were telling us the story, like right now, because
You don't look that sick, Anthony.
Yeah, externals look okay.
Good, I don't point.
First year, did all the work, service, direction, didn't want to, but did everything. And second year and third year, I got all the stuff pretty fast. Relationship, job, then I lost them pretty fast. And it was like that I was stuck right into the sober, and it's like, Jesus, I just can't keep up, And now I guess it was good to hear you share, because I'm still doing all that stuff, home group, responsibility.
What's the question, Anthony?
I suppose I want to re-clarify, like you said, make the ground fertile for God to make a change, so how will make the ground fertile?
I don't know if I understand the question, but the universe will. So Anthony, I think, is asking the question. He's saying, my life's been pretty good since I've been in AA. Congratulations, enjoy that. Don't ask for trouble. Trouble will find you. And as you grow, if you continue to do the deal, if you continue to try to put the steps in operation in your life, there will be what Dowling said to Bill when Bill said, "Will I never be happy?" And Dowling said to him, "No, not you. You have divine dissatisfaction." But we're talking about our founder. We're talking about a man who was not an average man, and Dowling was not an average man talking to Bill Wilson. And he was big enough to say to Bill, "I don't think you're ever going to be happy. You're going to make a hell of a contribution. You're going to have some peace. You could have some joy in your life, but you're going to be a man who's struggled. You're neurotic. But God has somehow designed you in such a way that we're going to use your neurosis and use the solution that you found to change your life and to heal others." If you're continuing to practice the program and you help others, the world will present to you what you have to deal with. And when you have to deal with it, most of us, when it presents it, we don't take it on and embrace it and change it. We have trouble. We ignore it. We want a different, the universe that takes this on. We say, "I don't want to take that on." So if you have a sponsor and a helper or a spouse, if you're married, you don't have to do inventories as often as if you're not married. That's a joke. I'm going to say, could spouses do it for each other? Is kind of what I meant. But I mean that. I think that, and some people just basically live a pretty good life. They don't create a lot of messes for themselves, and that's good. I was pretty rambunctious. I created a lot of messes for myself, and but I think if you and I continue to work with others, and as we continue continue to do step work, our consciousness will grow, and as our consciousness grows, our standards will rise, and we will have a little bit of that divine dissatisfaction, and the next thing that we have to do will show up for us to do. And if you have a sponsor, they often will see things that we don't see. It helps. Yeah.
Jamie, I'll call it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. Great to hear you again. My question is around step 6 and 7, and you shared a lot about sitting in your defects for quite a while. I guess at 6, 7, 8 years of recovery, I'm 7.5. The big book has kind of 2 paragraphs on step 6 and 7 and asks for God to entirely remove our defects. The 12 and 12 has quite a bit more information on it. And it says also separates, the 6 and 7 separates the men from the boys. Is it really God removing our defects, or do we have to bring the shovel and put in the action as well? So just if you could talk a little bit about how to actually remove the defects and how it worked for you.
I'm going to talk about that in the second session. It is both. Is the answer. So Jamie asked a question about the big book doesn't have much in it about 6 and 7. It's really just a paragraph. Is it really that God removes them? As there's a sense of on page 84 and 85. If you read some of Bill's correspondence, you will see he talks about being relieved of his alcoholism, released from his alcoholism. He does not very much use the word recovery. He talks about release, which is an interesting thing because he clearly, without question, obtained a release without doing anything. He obtained a release with his spiritual experience. And but our minds want to understand a spiritual process, and that's bringing a knife to a gunfight. Over a period of time, you will gain a sense of it, but you will not gain all of it. So, I'm going to stop here in a minute, but that's everything there is to know? Okay? No, but it's circle. It represents a universe, okay? That's what you know. Okay? That's what you don't know. This is what you don't know and don't know you don't know. Almost everything that's of any value in your recovery comes from what you don't know and don't know you don't know. It is a spiritual process. The mind wants to know. It's a booby price. The mind wants to be right. It's the worst booby price. Okay. It is. We have a knower inside of us that we generally do not access. We go to the ego, the intellect as the knower, and we don't access the intuition and the soul in that process, which are deeper knowers. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about steps. Thank you very much. It just makes it a little easier that I don't have to keep turning my head through the whole process. Don't want to sound like a hard ass. Just I want us to feel like we're more together. So for the next 40 minutes or something like that, I'm going to kind of talk about the steps as related to. I think what I see who people. So it's obvious that what our program is the steps. And if we do the steps, that we are promised at the end of it is that having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. The change in our lives is that we are now awake rather than sleepwalking through our own lives. A joke that I tell that my wife hates, but my wife's not here, so I'm going to tell the joke. Has to do with the lady that goes to a doctor and she says, "Doctor, I'm having this problem." And the doctor says, "What's wrong?" And she says, "Well, I'm passing gas. You can't hear it and you can't smell it, but I have this horrible sensation and I wish you'd give me something for it." And so the doctor gives her medication, asks her to come back in 2 weeks. She comes back in 2 weeks and he says, "How's the problem now?" She says, "Well, it's worse." And he says, "What do you mean?" She says, "Now you can smell it." He said, "Well, good, now that we have your nose cleared up, we can work on your hearing." Most of the problems in our life we don't see, but the people around us see just fine. And that is our consciousness. And so if I had a magic wand where I were to say, I'm going to remove every single defect or character and problem that you have right now and wipe the slate clean, on the condition that you come back to this room in 10 years. If I had that wand and removed every debt that you had and every problem that you had, if you didn't have a change in consciousness, you would have recreated the exact situation that exists in your life today. The only way that you will effectively change in any significant way in your life is not with information, not with technology, not with belief, not with dogma. It's with an alteration or change in your consciousness. You're going to see it differently. When you see it differently, you will start to respond differently towards it. So most of our problems live in the netherland, in our subconscious. And the very first thing we do when we're trying to change something is we tell the truth about it. So what's the very first thing we do when we come into Alcoholics Anonymous? You introduce yourself at some point as an alcoholic. Not a small thing. And when you do that, you then can start to raise your alcoholism in your consciousness. And you can start to direct your attention and intention towards it. And it shifts when it's in your consciousness. When you start to see it, you start all of a sudden to see I want to drink. You know what? That's what happened to Bill Wilson in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel. He was conscious, and all of a sudden, for the first time, he saw the thought pattern and the rationalization pattern that he was a sucker for and fell into every time it happened. But all of a sudden, he saw it differently, and he saw that he had to do something different than he had been doing up till that time, and that's when he, called Reverend Tunks, and Tunks gave him the numbers, and and he went for it. So what we're trying to do ultimately in this program is raise our consciousness. The ego does not want to change. The ego is so the problems that we have in this room, me included, not like I came from Minnesota and I'm problem free and I just want to tell all you folks about how to become problem free. The problems we all have in this room are not new. They're not weeks old. They're not months old. They're years old. They're years old. And your ego says, look, I don't give a shit. Whatever you want to do, you just keep doing it. You want to go to meetings? You go to meetings. You want to read the book? Good. You want to take the steps? But get this straight. We're not changing. So do whatever you want to do, but this ain't changing. I mean, it's hopeless. It is not, unless we access a spiritual solution, it's hopeless. It's not going to change. And what we do with a life which there's no change, we go find people that will adapt to our crap. And we keep them as long as they can stand it. And when they can't stand, it's like this cat making love to the skunk. It isn't that the cat had everything they wanted. They just had all she could stand. They leave. And when they leave, we find replacements. It is hopeless without God. It is hopeless without a spiritual process, not a psychological process, not an information process, not a belief process. So when I came into AA, the message I got was, you got a disease. Disease has symptoms, You're drinking, part of the symptoms is withdrawal. You're drinking a lot, and you stop drinking, you're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be pretty nervous. You're not going to sleep. I mean, I was newly married. My sex life went into the toilet, and I was sleeping about 2 hours a night for the first month that I was in Alcoholics Anonymous. Thought, this is not good. I remember then I go talk to the old timers, and they're saying, this is pretty typical. Don't worry about it. It'll come back, and you'll be okay. But I got the message that what was wrong, that alcoholism was affecting me physically, mentally, and spiritually. Everything that I did and every decision that I made would bring me closer to my next drink or further away from my next drink. And then if I took care of my alcoholism with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, it would take care of me. It was kind of the simple sort of thing. You want a life, kid? You want to be happy? There's two ways to be happy. One is get everything you want. Probably not going to happen. The other way is to change the way you respond to what happens to you in your life. And we're going to show you a way through the use of the steps to change the way that you react to life and the way you respond to life. And we started to do the step work. And in AA, we're kind of funny. We talk about, so if we were going up to someone and we were asking them how they were doing, at one level, we kind of measure how we're doing by how long we've been sober. So if we're around and you're sober, you've been in AA for 2 years and you're sober for 2 years, you get a gold star. That's great. But, it's almost, it isn't like we don't know that there's a mental and emotional and spiritual aspect to the disease that continues. Okay? So there's a hell of a lot of us that are depressed. There's a lot of us that have anxiety attacks. There's a lot of us that have a level of fear, which, is somewhat invisible to us, as I just explained, and it's at every level. We're not functioning well. So we're sober, and we're going to AA, and we're doing the steps, but our level of, if you took that out in the street, and went to, I don't know, went to someone who knew you, and they said, "How's Harry doing?" You say, "Well, I'm not impressed. I mean, he's sober, but he's not, he's still, I don't know if I'd want to hire him." So, well, we're maybe happy about that progress. The world in general might not be impressed with what happens to us in the first 3 months or 6 months or 9 months of our sobriety. Our families probably are pretty damn impressed because they've been watching us cycle, through the disease. So many of us, when we come in here, we stop drinking, but the disease goes underground. And then we start, because we have this pattern of compulsive and obsessive behavior, many of us start to develop areas of problems, be it pornography, money spending, eating, overworking, anxieties. There's a whole raft of neurosis that we may not be dealing with, and we have this kind of groove where we kind of get obsessive with our thought process, and we can slop into that groove without much effort. So I have a tendency, when I think I'm powerless over alcohol, my life is unmanageable, to think that now that I'm an Alcoholics Anonymous and I have a program, I'm not drinking, and my life's okay. My life should be okay. And then we have I think our minds says that most of us today, when we go to attack what's not working in our lives, we try to manage it. It doesn't work. If there's anybody that we would hire as the manager of your life, it would not be you. It would be kind of dumb, wouldn't it? We're going to get the person who created the problem to resolve the problem. Which is Einstein. That quote about you can't resolve the problem with the same consciousness that created the problem, that's a quote from Albert Einstein. And no, it can't be silly. It's your life, and it's going to be implemented through you. But the fact is if you wanted a mechanism that would guarantee to be repressive to your recovery, it would be that you would have a self-directed life. And that's the choice that we have. You want a self-directed life or a God-directed life? That's what Chamberlain said. You can have a God-directed life and suffer the consequences, or you can have a self-directed life and suffer the consequences. That's the paradigm. But the difference in those two is night and day. It is so unbelievably different that when you have a self-directed life, your ego and your intellect are in charge. Okay? So it's your thought process and your intelligence that is, but it's your pattern. It's your emotional pattern that you bring into the process. It's your view of the world. I had a view of the world. I had a hole in the fence through which I looked at the world. It happened to be directly below the cow's tail, there were thousands of holes in the fence, but that was I had my chair set up, I had my iced tea, had my rug, had a little umbrella over my chair. I didn't go to any other hole. I went to my spot. Once in a while the cow would move and I'd have a different view, but most of the time that was my view. And until I started to see things differently, I wasn't able to act differently. And that's part of what, when Chamberlain booked, the new pair of glasses, the reason that we start to respond differently is through our gradual spiritual awakening and through the raising of our consciousness, we start to see life differently. Okay? And we start to have a different internal conversation. So most of us come in here with an internal conversation that's killing us. We come in here with an internal conversation that we have to, drink a pint a day to have life be okay. Something's wrong with that. And when we stop drinking a pint a day, that conversation doesn't go away. It's still there. We have to find a solution for that conversation. What happens in Alcoholics Anonymous is we get a new conversation. We get a God conversation. We get a program conversation. We get a sponsor conversation. We get a step conversation that replaces that internal dialogue. And we come into a meeting and we kind of check our mind at the door, and we come in and we join the collective. There's a collective consciousness in a room. So we're all kind of, we kind of check our individual mind at the door. Now this is going to sound like brainwashing, but That's part of what happens, and we join the collective consciousness. And in that, there's an increased intelligence, there's an increased awareness, there's an increased consciousness, and little by little, for an hour, that may be for a lot of us, that's maybe the only peace we have as newcomers in the day, was that hour. But little by little, we're able to take some of that consciousness and some of that peace out of that room into the world. And that's one of the things, spoonful by spoonful, that happens as we go through. I think that our mind tends to not believe that after we're sober for a period of time that we're powerless and unmanageable. I think our mind is saying that I now know. So when we go to resolve the issues in our life, we go to what we know. We go to the words of the step. I'm going to go do a 4-step. I'm going to go do a 6-step. I'm going to go do, we could go, you go right to a 4-step. You don't do 1, 2, and 3. Because I know 1, 2, and 3. I've done 1, 2, and 3. I'm just trying to, right now, I'm doing an inventory. What are you doing? I'm doing an inventory. Have you taken a look at your powerlessness? No. I get it. Why do you think I go to 3 meetings a week and have a sponsor and read the book? I got it. Well, if you really got it, you wouldn't have the problem. Okay. It is so I think in my life, one of the biggest issues that I have is I tend to not give much credence to my ongoing powerlessness and unmanageability. When, by definition, when I'm going to an area in my life that's not working very well, I'm powerless and unmanageable. Okay? And when I look for a resolution in that, I'm looking for information, not God. So I come to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. Why do I need a power greater than myself when I have a clear understanding of the problem? And I have a clear understanding of what I'm supposed to do. I mean, the mind really thinks that it has that. Okay? And as a result of that, we end up in a closed system. We end up being self-directed with good motives. And now we're self-directed using the AA system. So we think we're, doing the right stuff, But we're defining the problem ourselves and selecting the solution ourselves within the program. And in some ways, we stumble, on things that work, in that process. But most of the time, because we're self-directed, it just isn't very powerful because there's no surrender in that process. And the steps are not mechanical. If the steps were mechanical, every time you had a problem, you just click your heels to the 3rd-step prayer and you'd be back in Kansas. You'd be okay. There'd be no problem. Okay? But sometimes you click your heels and say the 3rd-step prayer and no one's home. Okay? Because they're spiritual, because they're of God, because language cannot totally contain them, there's a way of bringing ourselves to that process that makes it more likely that we're going to get the results of that process. And that's the biggest challenge for me. I mean, when I go to do step work, can I do the step work in a way that I can start to get the result that I would like to get out of the steps? You go to a thing like this and I can't, for a long time I'd be having difficulty in my life when I was going through those 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years that I was stumbling. And by the way, you take a look at that and you think you weren't doing very well. I was doing the best I knew how to do. I couldn't have done, I really think I had a pretty good attitude. I was going to 5 or 6 meetings. I had a sponsor. I was trying to do the steps. It wasn't like I was, had a bad attitude. I was trying to sponsor guys. I was giving talks. I was doing 12-step work. I wasn't, my life was unmanageable. And I wasn't able to access, the steps in an effective enough way that I could snap my little fingers and go do that. So a lot of time I was doing 12-step work and I wasn't getting much result. And I think there's a lot of people in the program who are saying, well, you're doing it wrong. If you're doing it right, you get the result. They're saying, well, I don't want to argue with you, but I don't think it's mechanical. I don't think it's controllable. I think if you come into it with the right heart, with an open mind, with some aspect of surrender, with some humility, you're always going to get some result. But life isn't that simple. I have trouble with my thought process. I don't seem to be able to control my thinking. I have trouble with my emotional process. And I know over a period of time that will get better and I can get some help with it. But it isn't like I don't struggle with my life. And sometimes I'm neurotic, so I make that, it is what it is. You do the best job you know how to do with that's all you can do. Okay? But I think the problem that many of us have today with the program is when we go to the steps, and we're going to do some step work, that most of us want more information. And we want more information because then we're going to manage the process. We're going to define it, and we're going to manage it. Even though we created it, and we've been unable to change it effectively for the last 15 years. We're now going to take it on. Because I'm serious. I really want to do this. Give me a break. I mean, it is bigger than we are, is what I'm trying to say. It is our alcoholism. Even though we're sober 3 years or 13 years, it's still the emotional and mental and spiritual aspects of your alcoholism. In my mind. Why do I go to AA today? Treat my alcoholism. Well, you haven't had a drink. No, my mental, emotional, and spiritual aspect of my disease. And I don't want to sound neurotic about that. I mean, I don't want the people who aren't in the program still think that's kind of goofy, that we're, are you so lame? Do they tell you that you're sick and spend the rest of your life, that you can't have a normal life and be okay or can't be cured? I'm saying, look, I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm just telling you my life's better when I go to AA. I don't have to go to AA. I mean, there's lots of people who have a pretty damn good life. They go to a meeting a week or 2 meetings a week. That doesn't work for me. My style and what I'm doing, I go to 4 or 5 meetings a week. That's what works for me. It's just my choice. Is that okay with you if that's my choice? So it's and so a lot of what we're missing when we go to do our step work is 1, 2, and 3. I don't think that most of us have 1, 2, and 3 alive when we go to do 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, and 9. And that's one of the reasons where they're not empowered in that process. So I try to. I think I have a ongoing, serious appreciation for 1, 2, and 3. Inventory, I think, if you're going to be on a spiritual walk, doing some inventory work is absolutely necessary on an ongoing basis. I think you can get neurotic about it. I think today, in the old days, I think when people would do their list, they weren't as, the religion of the day is psychology. Okay? So back in the 60s, when someone came in, if they had a list, they had 10 people on the list. I mean, they had their family, and they had the people at work, and they had some people that they grew up with. Now you see a 30-pager. You aren't that important. I mean, we've got everybody on the playground. We're back, the stuff we did when we were 5 and 6 years old. It is this neurotic, it is reflective of our society. In 1967, when I came in, if you looked up in the yellow pages for psychiatrists and psychologists, there was 1 or 2 pages. Today it's an industry. It is, literally, we are directed. That is where most people go to resolve and get information. Most of the young people that come from the middle and upper middle class families that we see in AA, they all have therapists. So they have paid people they can go and have an hour or 2 conversation with weekly. And I don't have any great argument with that, except for the fact that I think it gets in the way a lot of times for step work. They're more interested in what their therapist has to say. They're more interested in psychology because they're the subject. Okay, I'm serious. All of us. I really don't mean that. I think this past year went to a psychologist for 4 months to deal with some issues I was having with my retirement and the new way I looked at myself, and I'm no longer a big deal, and I'm scared about this, and I got this going on, and I needed someone to talk to. My sponsor died. I've got a new sponsor. I'm talking to him, but I needed someone that I wanted to have that conversation with. And the therapist I went to has been sober for 30-some years and understands the program and was helpful to me. And I would go back in a New York minute. I think that outside help doesn't bother me. I don't think that's reflective of the fact that I have a good program or a bad program. It's just not supposed to be in place of what I'm doing, because we really have, we have a process that can repeat a spiritual awakening. I mean, think about that. I mean, not just allow you to quit drinking. We have a process that can offer you a spiritual awakening, that can offer you a level of awakeness and a level of peace, a level of serenity in your own life. I mean, I don't know where the hell it is just astounding that that's what we have. And the reason that it's accessible to most people in the room is that our entry point for coming in here is a breakdown. And the breakdown is a collapse of our ego. The collapse of our ego is a surrender. The surrender allows the space for the spiritual. Without that space, it's all ego. And that's really limited. Doesn't work for our level of issue. So most of us, when we come in, the initial work we do, the step work that we do, is powerful and effective. And we make some pretty big changes, and we're reasonably happy with some pretty difficult circumstances. I mean, some of the people who come in here in their first year are happier than many of the members that are sober 4 or 5 years in the rooms, because they've got the honeymoon. They're in a clearing, and they got this sense that this is what I'm supposed to do, and if I do this, it's going to be okay. And then when the ego returns, we want a specifically tailored solution to us, rather than deal with our alcoholism. Because underneath, there's nothing wrong with you. In my way of looking at it, most of what's been wrong with me is my neurosis and my alcoholism. And the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the steps relieve that. And when you relieve it, there's a reasonably okay Bob underneath. I'm a product of the original equipment manufacturer, intact and okay. And when I take the lid off the box, and AA gives me the opportunity to take the lid off the box, I mean, that's the treasure of life. I mean, I think what God's going to ask us if we ever get to the gates is, did you ever get to be Bob? No, I was an alcoholic, and I kept tearing my life apart. Never really found out what the hell I was supposed to do with life. And I think that's all I'm supposed to find out in my journey. It's a school. Love, life's a school, love is a subject. And I'm supposed to find out what Bob's supposed to do. I'm not going to find that. I'm not going to do that perfectly. But AA, the process of finding God, I think is a process of removal, not addition. We have dragged our perfect, intact magnet from the original equipment manufacturer, your soul, the part of you that is pure and intact and okay and unchanged, and is the essence of who you are, and we've dragged that perfect crystalline magnet through the junkyard of life. And we show up at the front door of AA with a 6-foot ball of dirt. And through the steps, and through the people in the rooms, and through your sponsor, you start to steam clean it. And you start removing some of the stuff. And when you, little by slowly, over a period of time, you start to remove it, and you see that there's a shape inside of it. It kind of looks like a lamp. It's got some jewels, and it's polished, kind of gold, really kind of attractive. And you get this idea that maybe there's something inside of there that's really pretty special. You're really not exactly sure what it is, but pretty cool. And then when you're in 2 or 3 years, someone hands you a cord. You're in a little while longer, you plug it into the wall. Sometime after that, they give you a bulb. A little while after that, you find out you turn it on. Later on, you find out it's a 3-way bulb. It is when you're connected to the source, and that's all When you have a self-centered life, you're a victim of the circumstances that are happening around you. When you have a God-centered life, the thing that the shift of that is, in a God-centered world, I'm not as important and it is not as important. And that's why we're able to deal with circumstances that are often quite difficult when we're centered in the program and when we're centered in our higher power. Because in that space, I'm not as important and it is not as important. It's a different paradigm and a different way of looking. And when you bring that, when your ego's not in charge and you start doing the steps, your fear of change. Most of us are just so afraid of change. I mean, if there's one thing that shocked me over my lifetime, is how most of us don't want to change. And that's what, if someone said, how would you describe your first 6 or 7 years in AA? I'd say I tried to change and I failed. I tried to change and I failed. I tried to change and I failed, but I still grew. But there comes a time where you've either got to change or you're going to stop growing. And it's like the age of reason. It's time. It's time. And then you got to do the work. And that's what I reached at 7 years. You asked me what brought me to the point. It was time. And I started to do the work. And I did it imperfectly. But I was pretty serious about it, and I had some help. And I stumbled through it, and I was okay. And my life started to change, and it opened up and was better by a factor of 2 or 3 times than I ever expected it to be after I took that on. And it didn't matter that I was afraid. I didn't matter anymore. At that point, my pain was high enough that I surrendered. And what I wanted didn't matter. I remember I was a salesman who never made sales calls. I didn't even take the chance that you dragged me across the desk and forced me to sell you something. So I did this deal with my sponsor. I was trying to raise money for a deal that I was putting together. And I promised my sponsor that I'd go out and I'd call him this executive. Now I'm a 30-year-old guy, and I'm not very successful, and I'm not doing very well, and I've got to go call in a vice president of a major corporation and try to sell him a $10,000 or $20,000 investment. Now, if I sell him a $10,000 investment, my little company makes $1,000, and I know it's not going to work. So I'm out in the parking lot of this 20-story headquarters of a national corporation, saying the third step prayer to get my ass out of the car to go make a sales call that I know is not going to work, and I'm afraid to do. And so I go up, get in the elevator, go up, make the call, and the guy buys $20,000 worth of the investment. So I made $2,000, and I'm on the way down, and I get this thought, and I thought, God, if a guy did that regularly, it was like so I literally took some action that I was pretty sure wasn't going to work. And that's what the power of this program is. Once we kind of put ourselves, most of us are sitting with serious problems, or fairly serious problems in our lives. And the solution would be, if you ever had the conversation with someone, what do you think God wants you to do? Well, I know what God wants me to do. Well, why don't you do that? I don't want to. I don't think I can. It is just nuts, because ultimately that's the question. When we talk about doing the next right thing, when we talk about doing the steps, when we talk about opening ourselves up, to the relationship with the God of our understanding, to increase our conscious contact with the God, seeking only for the knowledge of His will for us. And most of us don't ask that question very often at all in our lives. What do you think God wants to do? Because we don't want the answer. Because if we answered the question, we wouldn't be in control. I'd rather sort of know what God would want me to do, but that I don't want to give up control. I want to be able to ultimately decide what I'm going to do. And that's what's blocking most of us, me, from the deal. And the periods of time where we're in pain, the periods of time where we're motivated to really take it on, what we want isn't as important, and we're able to go through do the work. And to the extent that what we want is not steering the ship, we're able to do the work. And to the extent that we're able to do the work, we get the benefit and we get the spiritual awakening. And to the extent that we're not willing to give up that control, we don't get much result. And we stay stuck. We're good people. I don't. It isn't a matter, and I don't want to give the impression that, you know, if you're really a good AA, you're going to do the steps in a way that you're going to get rid of all your problems. You know, you don't end up in a room like this because you don't care. You don't end up in this conversation because you're, you know, because you know, we're in this room because we care about how we live our lives and we want our lives to be better. We're in this room because we like to be happy. We're in this room because we want to deal with our alcoholism. So this isn't a matter of, you know, having a conversation that we want to beat anybody up and say, you know, we're going to separate the room into good guys and bad guys. You know, it seems to me that anybody who walks in this room is a seeker and is interested in living their life in a more effective and better way. I would just want to report to you that the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous are really powerful, transforming spiritual principles. And if we would open ourselves up to and most of us have had the biggest experience you can have. We've had the experience of being able to stop drinking and stop using. You'd think that if we had that, and that's something we did no matter what. That's something we did when it hurt our parents. That's something we did when it hurt our children. It's something we did when we lost our jobs. And we kept doing it. And we kept doing it, and we kept doing it. And then we came in, and through this, you know, whatever combination of the STEPS program book and our higher power, we're not doing that anymore. Now, I don't know how you could find a much greater demonstration of the power of God than that. And yet, we're stuck with problems like divorce, debt, jobs, work, children. We're stuck with life. Many of us are, you know, have levels of fear and anxiety that are, you know, weighing on us, that are, you know, pretty unnecessary if we would be able to really rely, and we forget this powerful experience that we had. We forget, you know, when we weren't in charge, when we really lightened up and had a surrender experience and really kind of relied on the fact that, hey, if I do this AA thing, I think it's going to be okay. So my conversation today is mostly that I want to say, I think after you've been around a while, I think we can get kind of flat about the steps. We know the words, we know the menu, and a lot of us aren't, you know, we're not as empowered as we'd like to be with respect to the application of those steps in our life. And I would recommend, for me, when that happens, it's a 1, 2, and 3. It's a 1, 2, and 3 step problem. It's not an information problem. The other thing that I see today in the modern world is that people don't do 8 and 9 very well. We do 4 and 5 better than we do 8 and 9. The capstone of our recovery program are 8 and 9. The prima facie evidence that we've done the work are the amends steps. A lot of the younger people come in and say, I can't do amends because I'm not in my job. I don't make enough money to get by. They don't understand that if they really started the amends stuff, even if it was small money, even if I owed you $1,000 and I paid you $10 a month, once I start that process, the universe starts to cooperate. I mean, and conspire, you know, that I might get a better job, that, you know, that Aunt Lucy dies and gives me, you know, $1,000 and I can send you two. I mean, there's so much, you know, what we do when we have a problem, we boot up the computer and throw everything we know on the screen about the problem. And then we start to rearrange what's on the screen to resolve the problem. 99 times out of 100, the solution comes from off screen. It doesn't come from what we know. It comes from someplace else. And when we live in a, you know, a spiritual space, we just know that, you know. And so my conversation today is one to just say that I want to remind us about how powerful the AA program is. I want to remind us that we've had about the biggest experience that would be a demonstration of the power of God and the power, in our being able to be sober. We couldn't have a much bigger evidence of the fact that the program works than that. And that if we would open that up to the chicken shit little problems that we're all sitting with in this room right now, we'd probably be okay. In that process, we probably need a guide. We need a sponsor. We need someone to have the conversation with. You do not need a perfect sponsor. As time went on, I met a lot of people that were smarter than my sponsor. I met a lot of people who could give big book talks and seminars better than my sponsor could give. My sponsor was a high school educated postman, but he had a wisdom and a strength of character, and he was my big book. His wife was my wife's sponsor. In 43 years, we never called their house and asked to come over that they didn't say, come ahead. With children, without children, fighting, not fighting. They were he was just the best thing in the world for me. He calmed me down. He was, when whoever said we were stark raving sober, I was stark raving sober. And he was my man. He was just the perfect guy for me. You don't need a perfect sponsor. You need you need the humility to be able to have a relationship and to be able to have a conversation and listen to what God has to say through the person you're having the conversation with. And we're all stumbling along. We're fellow travelers. We're sharing our experience on the road. And one of the great things that happens to us is you have to learn how to allow your sponsor to have problems. I mean, it is really we don't want our sponsors to have problems. We want perfect people to help us. So when we select, we often go try to get the person who looks like they have it all together. And then when we find out that they don't have it all together, we feel like they're letting us down. And we're really disappointed that we find out that, they're doing this or they're doing that. And I wouldn't recommend that we have people that aren't in the game and aren't serious about how they live their lives. I'm just telling you that there are no perfect people. And part of what we need to do in our own growth process is to be able to maintain relationship with human beings. And in that process, we will develop a compassion for ourselves. And in that compassion that we have for ourselves, we're going to be able to work on our defects of character. If you don't have compassion for yourself, you will eventually not be able to attend to your weaknesses and defects of character, because it'll be turning the gun on yourself, and you won't be willing to look. So, I have twice had very serious financial issues in my life. I had a financial collapse in the late 80s. I was in the real estate business, and I had a near financial collapse in 1980, in 2008. And I can't tell you how dumb I felt losing half my net worth and damn near going over the cliff at almost 70 years of age, after I worked my lifetime to build up, the stuff for my family that I threw. Some of it was market, but half of it was stupidity and ill management. Fun inventory to do when you're 68 years old, to be able to take a look and say, I did it again. You did it again? I can understand that you did it the first time. You did it again? At 68? Yeah, I did it again at 68. So, what did I do? Well, for 6 months I was under my desk, sucking my thumb in the fetal position. And I went to Mass twice a week. I went to 5 meetings. I talked with my sponsor, and I did the steps. I did what I'd recommend that you do. It took me almost 2.5 years to pull myself out of it. I had to sell most of my assets to pay off the mess that I had helped create. And I thought that was the end of the world, and now I've come to believe, isn't it marvelous that I had assets to sell? Even though I had to give the money away. You created the problem. You dug the hole. Was there anybody else that was digging the hole? No, I think it was you, Bob. It's just life. It's just life. And, it's my relationship with my wife's a hell of a lot more important. My relationship with my kids are a hell of a lot more important. But money's important to me. Business is important to me. I want security. I worked 40 years building that company up, and it wasn't much fun losing this. But when it's all said and done, I'm still, my circumstances are fine. I'm going to be fine. So you're not free. We're not free from problems. What we are is we're granted a set of tools that allows me to go through that process and remain spiritually connected and whole. I don't have to strike my children. I don't have to take it out on my wife. And I can still go to meetings and work with people and do the steps and have an okay life. I want to thank you for the opportunity of spending the afternoon with you. For the next 10 minutes or so, I will do questions again, if anybody has any questions. Oh, lastly, I want to say, is when you get into, as I said, 8 and 9, I think are the two of the most important steps. They're the completion of the work. When we make a decision in step 3, what decision are we making? Some people think we're making a decision to do 4 through 9. It isn't accidental that the promises start to come after the 9th step. But the 8th and 9th step, I think, are the evidence that you're serious about your program and that you're really in the game. And I think that a lot of us cycle through getting more information and getting more insight into the issues, and we never get to 8 and 9 and start to do the real work. When you talk about 6 and 7, at some point in time you will find out that that's what's stopping us. It's your death hole. It says that I'm going to define the problem, and then I'm going to listen to what solution you have, and if I decide to do what you recommend, then I will implement that solution. You've got a death grip on that situation, and it isn't like I'm going to go with the best of and I'm going to lay out the problem, and I'm going to get some advice, and I'm going to pray about it, and then I'm going to try to do what God would have me do, regardless of what that is. That's a whole different solution. Now, most of us do not enter that. We go with goodwill, and we think we're doing the AA thing, and we take 6 and 7, and we define the problem, and we define the solution to it, and we control it. So it's limited by our insight, by our psychology, and by our control, and it blocks the power of the program. 8 and 9, when we make a decision, so we find out what our role is in the 4th column of the inventory. So we're isn't it? And you talk about transformations when we're doing an inventory. Would you have ever thought when you started your inventory that your grudge list, that your resentment list would end up being your 9-step list? I mean, if someone told you that, you wouldn't do it. I mean, you would say, there is no way I'm going through the. But for most of us, most of our 8-step list comes from our resentment list. Now, in order for it to go from our resentment list to our 8-step list, we have to go through a transformation. We have to go through a new way of seeing things. And when we have, with new eyes, we have a new level of consciousness. We start to really see our part and take on the responsibility. And until you can until you can own it, you can't deal with it. Until you can own it, you're a victim. Until you can own it, it's someone. Happiness is knowing who to blame. But once you own it, you suck it up, and you go make the amends. And you man up, or woman up. And that is, that's where the booster rocket gets lit. If you wonder why people who are reasonably well equipped in the business of life are unable to kind of get their life in order, usually it's 8 and 9, in my opinion. Lastly, I would encourage you to consider meditation. I don't think there is one particular spiritual practice that would help us more than seated meditation over a period of time. When I told you that one of the things we do when we enter a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous is we kind of check our mind at the door, and we come in and we join the collective consciousness in the room. And the collective consciousness in the room kind of lifts us. And we have a pretty nice experience for about an hour and a half, and then little by little we're able to take that out into the world. Meditation is like that. We are under the impression that we generate our thoughts. And a lot of the books today that are in psychology would say, just change the way you think. All your problems is your thinking. We say that a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous. Just select the right thoughts. Well, most of us have a little difficulty. I mean, the negative thoughts we have, by the time we kind of recognize them, we've already had them. We are the group of people that when we have a flat tire, we call suicide prevention. I mean, we are not, moderate. We are not moderate in our approach to life. And I like one or the other. So, we get overwhelmed somewhat quickly. When you start to meditate, the biggest thing is, first of all, you find out how busy your mind is. We joke about that. We joke about the committee, and we joke about how much thought process goes through there. But for most of us, that's kind of a new idea, how busy our mind is. We're just kind of shocked by how busy it is. The next thought is, I can't meditate. I mean, my mind's too busy. I don't do this very well. I want you to know that no one does it well. Okay? Meditation is sloppy. There's a wonderful woman by the name of Pema Chodron, who's the abbess of a Buddhist monastery in Nova Scotia, and she calls it blue-collar work. Taking your seat is the toughest thing. Taking your seat and keeping your seat is blue-collar work. Take your seat. Keep your seat. To be able to start out with 5 or 10 minutes and eventually escalate to, I use these beads on my wrist, I count, I go through it twice, and it takes me 20 minutes to go through a seated meditation. You will realize that you don't generate your thoughts. There are thousands of them come through every once in a while. One's about you and it's got Velcro on it, and you engage it. But what happens is you start to get the opportunity to get detached from your thinking. Throughout most of my life, I have had the sense that I'm driving a team of 6 very strong horses. And I'm doing everything I can do to keep them on the road. And what happens is I would get a thought and reaction, thought, reaction, thought, reaction. Today, I get a thought and I have a space. And in that space, I'm a human being. In that space, I have a choice. I never used to have a choice because I was too quick. I was too reactive. I was too type A or ADD or whatever the hell I was or am. But meditation offers a chance for you to become more detached from your thinking. And you can literally watch the thoughts go through you, like trains going through the station. You don't have to get on every train that goes through the station. Like clouds in the sky. And that's a freedom and a peace that you will have had when Christ said, I will give you a peace that's not in the world. For me, that experience came from that meditative process. Because today, I'm not, people would come up to me and I was like a jukebox. They'd put a quarter in me and they'd push B5 and we're going to dance. We're going to play B5. Today, you can put a quarter in me and push B5 and I get to choose whether we're going to dance. And I never had that choice. So, thank you for the opportunity to see your marvelous country. I'm astounded at the beauty and vastness of it. And the rugged individuality of the people in this room. Feels pretty familiar, but an interesting group. So, take 2 or 3 questions and we will end the day. Yes.
Yeah, hi, Jeremy O'Colly.
Jeremy.
I've had a couple of different definitions of meditation, just from being around probably had a couple of years. One is sort of like the mantra type meditation, which I think what you were just talking about, which is concentrating on the breath, and so no thought type meditation. And the other one is contemplation meditation, where you think about your day for 10 minutes and
Yep. Or read something scriptural or
Yeah.
discursive meditation.
What is step 11? Which one of those is step 11 talking about?
All of them.
Okay.
There is no. What I love about our program is there's no one way to do it. I mean, someone else may take the meditation. So the question was if there's discursive meditation where you focus on literature, a thought, and then there's more the traditional, almost yogic meditation where you focus on your breath. Which one is the big book talking about? And I think all of the above. I mean, Bill Wilson in the 12 and 12 talks about the prayer of St. Francis, which is what he uses as a meditation. I use a focus on my breath. So it's a quiet, seated, meditation. But I love that our program doesn't say one way is correct. It just says find your way. And that's what that's the same thing with the steps. I mean, we're all sitting in this room. We're boys and girls. We're white and black. We have different levels of IQ, different levels of education, different personalities. And when you bring that to the steps, I mean, the fact that each one of us would do it identically, I don't think so. But it is a practice, and they are, we're each going to our best of our ability, we're going to engage the steps. And we're going to engage them a little bit differently, but there's going to be a similar thread all the way through the steps. But it's a spiritual process, and I think it's a very individual process. But we have the description of the process. Anybody else?
David Alcoholic. I just wanted to ask how you've handled the disappointment of people in the fellowship that you've been closest to. I've had a sister that had 6 years after they went out and drank and suicided. And have you had that kind of experience, and how did you use that to, well, for me, in some ways it reinforces my need to do the program, and other times it sort of leaves me bewildered whether has she made that decision and I made mine.
So the question is, have I been disappointed by people who have relapsed, and some of them have gone back out and killed themselves in the relapse? Yeah, I think my wife and I, we have 3 boys that are in recovery. My wife's a carrier. None of us were alcoholic when we met her. I'm astounded by the strength of the disease. The world is just nuts today. I mean, the suicide rate of young people today is just unbelievable. And some of that has to do with the chemicals that are out there. But I mean, there's an angst in life. I mean, we are disconnected from our values, and we've stopped this business where we kind of do things by the numbers, where you get your education and you get a job or get married, and now we don't have any rules, and no one knows where the hell they're going, and there's a lot of angst, with connection to that. We don't want to, it is just, they're not grounded. They're not connected to the meaning of their life. And so, I'm astounded I'm more disappointed by people who are in AA that hurt people. I'm more understanding of relapse than I am of people who are malicious in recovery. I get more disappointed by that. And again, I am taken by the strength of the disease. And some of that is not just purely alcoholism, it's sociopathy. I mean, we come in here with a mixture of problems. So, one of you.
Can you share a bit of your experience on...
Talk louder.
Could you share a bit of your experience with sponsorship? Like, how so were you when you sponsored guys, and how has that evolved?
I tried to get people that I could sponsor in my first 2 or 3 or 4 years, and I didn't get many. I think people saw me as too young, and I think they saw me as... I don't know how they saw me. At any rate, I wasn't attractive enough. I didn't have what people wanted. I remember when my wife went to her sponsor and said, "Why doesn't anybody ask me to sponsor them?" And Jen said, "Well, honey, they don't want what you have." And my wife's sponsor was a very gentle lady, and that's probably the harshest single sentence she ever said to my wife. And Linda, if Linda were sharing that, obviously that has changed. My wife sponsors lots of folks, and she's a nurturing and got a great program. I'd rather have her program than mine. When I had the change at 6.5 or 7 years, I started getting people, I had to beat them away with a bat. I don't know how people could see that. They just, it just changed. I didn't feel like I was doing anything different. And, but I think I was deeper. I think I had more to give. And I think I was more attractive, and I think I had something that people wanted because I had gone through. And it's evolved today. I mean, today I get more, I do have a couple of new guys in my life, but I tend to get people who've been around a long time that are having problems. I'm kind of the old white-haired guy. I used to be in charge of what was going on. Now they don't even tell me what's going on, so I have to go find my own thing. Are you?
Well, I've got a lot about what you've said about the 6 and 7, and you've done not having the power to do it. And as for power, I was a bit confused when you were saying about working the steps and helping others to stay sober. But you said, but don't drink, or I stay and I don't drink. You mean by willpower or by? That seems to be. I'm
both.
Confused.
I mean, I don't.
Confused by that.
Both. I don't. I mean, you've got to make a decision to stop drinking. When you first, drinking, at some point in time, drinking is not any longer an option. And for most, I mean, the problem that I see today is that we're getting dogmatic, and people would say, look, if you did the program right, it'd be okay. And if and I belong to a group, and we get a special group of people, and we do it right. And I just want to, I want to read. I want you to listen when you think it's you doing it, and when you think it's your intellect, when you think it's your ability. This is the bottom of page 80. This is just after step 10, and this is the bottom of page 84. And it says, we have stopped fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. And if I'm working with a person who's got problems with pornography or with debt or with whatever they're doing, I'll substitute words, in here. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil as if from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally. We find that this has happened automatically. Does that sound like I'm doing that? We will see that our attitude towards liquor has been given to us, okay? Without any thought or effort on our part, it just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, nor are we resisting. That's the miracle. We're not fighting, nor are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor afraid. That's our experience, so long as we keep ourselves in fit spiritual condition. So when Bill Wilson, in his own experience, talks about being released from his alcoholism, so it's both. And Dr. Bob didn't have that release. Dr. Bob fought drinking well into his sobriety, and he would go visit the boys in the ward. When he got thirsty, he would go. And each of us has our own demons and our own way of doing that. Did you have one of you ladies here have a question?
Yeah, thanks. It's been great to hear you, Jenny Alcoholic.
Hi, Jenny.
You mentioned earlier in the first part of the workshop that deepening of understanding. I think you were talking about fear and a few other things, but you also talked about service and the level, the deepening of the service levels that you go to. And I just wanted to ask you, in long-term sobriety, how have you had a point in your experience where, I sort of feel that you can never give enough back to Alcoholics Anonymous for what's been given to you, and how you've sort of done that, I guess, with your family? And
so I've been active in most areas of service in Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't mean to offend anybody or to sound sacrilegious. I think AA is to return us to life, not to be our lives. So I don't. So ending up being a professional AAer is not what I want. I want a marriage. I want my life. I want my kids. I want to be able to play golf. I want life. Now I sponsor. And saying that, I go to 5 meetings a week. I'm active. I give talks. It isn't like I'm not in the game. But I'm not looking to be a professional member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And some of my biggest heroes are Tom Ivester is a man of more service than anybody I've met. Clancy Emerslin is a man who does more. That's intimidating to me. I do not want 100% of my life to be that. I want balance in my life. Now, if that makes me a bad guy, could I do more? Yeah, I could do more. It's a balance, and what I try to do is stay open to what God presents to me in my life. I think my children are an AA request. I think my marriage is an AA request. I have watched people ruin their marriages and ruin their relationships with people by doing too much AA. And that's a wrong word. I don't want to get the impression too much AA. I think when you're new, you can't do too much. You need to alter your thought process, and if you don't, taking your life out into the world with your thought process like waiting for a bus in a whorehouse. I mean, you're an accident waiting for something to happen. You've got to, so you need exposure to, the new way of thinking. So I know that what I said answered is kind of disappointing, but I've been a guy who's done a lot of service. But for the average person coming in here, their life isn't supposed to be entirely about AA. It's supposed to be their life. They're supposed to go coach Little League. They're supposed to be married. They're supposed to have a job. So if we start telling people that the prize for AA is that you get to be a perpetual 12-stepper, I mean, we're going to be able to hold the international in this room. I mean, the prize for being AA is you get your life back. And you need to be active enough to be able to maintain your sobriety. Yep.
Alistair Alcohol. Just one question, Bob. Outside of AA, what other influences spiritually have you had over the last few years that have made a major impact on you?
I have lots. The question is, outside of AA, what are the influences? I have lots of different things that I read. Buddhism is probably the biggest source or river of things that I read. There's a new book that I've been reading called Recovery by Rami Shapiro. There's probably one of the best things I've read on the 12 steps in the last. But I don't think that belongs in this conversation. I think this conversation is about Alcoholics Anonymous. I will tell you that I have a pretty broad experience in seeking. And I sponsor a bunch of guys, and some of them don't read at all. And so I don't think it's we need to kind of trust ourselves and to follow ourselves into. I think the truths that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous are so strong that if your heart's in the right place, you don't have to be afraid about reading anything. What will happen? All true things work together, and you will end up being more impressed with our program when you read other spiritual material. I mean, you'll be impressed with that if it's good spiritual material, and you will start to say, "Well, we do that. We believe this." So that so you start to see the universality of it. Okay. Yep.
Hi, Helen Alcoholic. You mentioned earlier the difference. You should have a shift between doing and being. What was that for you?
Yeah, that's a 4-hour conversation. When you have an alteration in being, what you do automatically changes. Doing flows out of being. Okay? When you go from doing, when I do the right things and I'm going to have the right things and I'm going to be okay, that's going upstream. When you connect with your being, okay, out of that having and doing just falls. It's the fruit of the tree. That's the direction of the flow of the universe, and that's the direction of the flow of life. The alteration and transformation that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous is an alteration of being. It's connecting with our true identity and our being, not our doing. We do not want to become a human doing. Yes, sir. Last question.
Barry, Bob. Bob, following on Anthony's question about sponsorship, I have been sponsoring somebody in Sydney who hasn't been around very long. And my sponsor and I decided to get him down here this week and give him some face-to-face stuff, which we did. And we were terribly impressed with the way he was going. He left my house at 7:30 yesterday morning to get a plane back to Sydney. At 11 o'clock his wife was on the phone in tears. He busted. Then he was on the phone in tears and sort of threatening suicide and apologising, as we do when well, I don't get a bust, I'm happy to say that I don't know how to handle it. You know, I really don't. I can't get this guy off my mind. You know, where did we go wrong? Has he gone wrong? Is the program wrong? I just felt, you know, so confident. He was as happy as a pig in shit when he left my house. And now...
You obviously scared the crap out of him.
And now he won't even return my sponsors or my calls. So obviously he's drinking. We both spoke to him this morning and sent him off to an 8 o'clock meeting in Sydney, but we haven't heard from him since.
Yeah, I mean, you know, just my brief meeting with you, you're an attractive man and a nice man. I mean, did you do anything wrong? I doubt it. I mean, you know, in retrospect, could we look back and think I would have had a little different conversation? We can second guess ourselves all we can. And when things calm down, you know, hopefully you'll be able to have that conversation with him. And maybe his wife can get him to call you. And he's probably ashamed. Or remember when I had my last drink on my honeymoon, my slip, I didn't want to call my sponsor. My wife said, "Oh, for God's sakes, you know, call Warren." And I did. And hopefully it will blow over and you'll get him.
Well, she kicked him out and he's gone to stay in a motel, and we both called him and said, come back to Melbourne today.
But if he's new, he probably, the other thing is remote sponsorship for new people. I don't think it's a good idea. I get asked a lot because I'm a big deal, and people come up in line and say, you know, they want, or they call you on the telephone, want you to do brain surgery over the phone. You know, and I know I'm not supposed to do it, but I say, well, you take the scalpel. You know, you know, but sponsoring a new guy at a distance, they just need hands-on. You know, and you could be an advisor. He doesn't even have to fire you. But you know, one of the things I would tell the guy, no, I mean, I'm giving advice, which is pretty cheap crap. But I would tell him to get someone in the group he goes to, so that there's someone that's got eyeballs on him, and then say, look, I'm not resigning. I'm just, you know, I want to ride shotgun or help in whatever way I can. So. Thank you very much. I'll hang around. So if there any other thing, why don't we close this with the Serenity Prayer. No, I don't like crop circles. I think that's a ritual. God,
grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference and share and keep coming back.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. We should try.